Okay, imagine this. You've worked your entire life to buy your dream home, only to have it stolen from you with just the stroke of a pen. It sounds impossible, right? Well, today we're going to break down a deed fraud scheme that did exactly that, and it targeted some of the most vulnerable people you can imagine. This quote from homeowner Janet Bruce, it just says it all. A home isn't just four walls and a roof. It's your security, it's your memories. For so many of us, it really is everything. But for Janet and 10 other families, all of that was put on the line by someone they actually trusted to help them. And that's really the question at the heart of this, isn't it? How does a lifeline from a professional, a lawyer no less, turn into a trap? The answer reveals this incredibly calculated scheme that preys on desperation and exploits the very trust we're taught to have in experts. So to really understand the impact of a crime like this, we have to start with the people. Let's begin with the story of Janet Bruce, a woman whose dream was just completely turned into a nightmare. So Janet was living the American dream. She was a home health aide who had immigrated from Guyana, and in 2006, she proudly bought her own home. She said it was the neatest one on the block. And for 7 years, everything was going great. But then in 2013, her husband had a stroke and couldn't work anymore. Suddenly, they fell behind on payments. Facing foreclosure, where the bank reclaims your home, they did what most of us would do. They went looking for help from a lawyer, a man named Sanford Solney. And this, right here, is where the help they were promised took a very, very dark turn. Let's break down exactly how this deed fraud scheme worked. It was a classic bait and switch, really, but one with absolutely devastating consequences. This slide just lays out the deception perfectly. On the left, you see the promise. Solney told these homeowners he'd work with the bank, get their debts cleared, and let them stay in their homes. It must have sounded like a miracle. But the reality, on the right, it was a total catastrophe. He was secretly having them sign documents that transferred their property deeds to his own company. And the worst part? He left them with the mortgage debt, and then he'd turn around and start the process to evict them so he could rent out their own homes to other people. So here's the playbook, laid out in 4 simple steps. First, he'd find homeowners in crisis, people behind on their payments. Second, he'd make this amazing promise of a short sale, which sounds helpful, right? It's a process where the bank agrees to a sale for less than what's owed. Third, he'd use that trust to get them to sign a stack of papers that, buried in the fine print, actually transferred ownership to him. And finally, once he had the deed, he'd evict the very people he promised to help and start collecting rent. Unbelievable. And the motive here was just simple, cold, hard profit. This wasn't some small operation. Over the years, Sanford Solney collected more than $500,000 in rent from the properties he'd stolen. And this wasn't a one-time thing. The court case involved 11 different homeowners. Many were Black, Latino, or recent immigrants, groups that are often targeted by these kinds of predatory schemes, and every single one of them lost their home. And maybe the most shocking number of all, this went on for 12 years. For over a decade, this cycle of targeting, deceiving, and evicting just kept going, which of course begs the question, how did he finally get caught? Well, that brings us to the courtroom. After years of absolute heartbreak for these families, the case against Sanford Solney finally went to trial. But you have to wonder, what does justice even look like in a situation like this? During her victim statement, homeowner Clotilde Sawadago pointed out something that for her was just a huge missing piece, a total lack of remorse. That simple observation, he didn't even say he was sorry, wow, it just speaks volumes, doesn't it? Now, on the other side of the courtroom, Solney's defense told a completely different story. His lawyer argued that these weren't, in his words, hapless victims. He claimed they were people who knowingly sold their deeds because they hadn't paid their mortgages in years. It was a completely different narrative from the one the homeowners were telling. So what happened in the end? What was the verdict? Well, as you can see, it was kind of a mixed bag. Solney was sentenced to up to 7 years in prison. And this is huge. The judge nullified the fraudulent deed transfers, which gave the homeowners a path to actually reclaim their properties. But, and this is a devastating blow, they were denied any financial restitution. That $500,000 in rent money, they wouldn't see a single cent of it. It's really easy to look at this and think it's just one bad guy in Brooklyn. But the truth is, this case is a symptom of a much larger nationwide problem that law enforcement is starting to take very, very seriously. In fact, the FBI has started issuing public warnings about a pretty big spike in property and deed fraud all across the United States. They're seeing these types of crimes pop up more and more, and they're urging all homeowners to be on high alert. The most common way they do this is something called quick claim deed fraud. Basically, criminals use publicly available info to forge documents, file them with the county, and transfer your property's title into their name. And the scariest part is, the real owner often has no idea it even happened until it's way too late. As FBI Special Agent Jody Cohen put it, the impact is just profound. People are having their roots literally pulled out from under them. It's a crime that doesn't just steal money, it steals a family's whole foundation, their sense of security, everything. So, with a threat like this on the rise, the big question is, what can we do to stop it? Well, the good news is that communities and lawmakers are starting to fight back. All across the country, state legislatures are finally recognizing the gaps in the system that let this kind of fraud happen in the first place. So, they're starting to work on new laws to create better safeguards for all of us property owners. Take Texas, for example. A new law there now requires a photo ID to file a quitclaim deed. I mean, that's just a common sense step that, believe it or not, wasn't always required. It also tightens the rules for notaries, those are the people who verify signatures, and it makes county clerks report any documents that look suspicious. These are real, concrete steps to make the whole system safer. And as Texas State Representative Rafael Anchia said, this is about what a community values. It's about making a collective decision to protect people's most important assets, and especially to stand up for the most vulnerable among us, like seniors who are so often the primary targets. So, I think the big takeaway here is this. The systems we all rely on to protect our property might not be as ironclad as we think. The stories of Janet Bruce and the other families are just this powerful reminder that we all have to be vigilant. And that leaves us with one final, pretty critical question. Your home is your most valuable asset. Are you sure it's secure?